My friends, good evening. I am here to talk to you about Juju Airways flight that crashed yesterday, the 22nd of June. It was connecting Bangkok to Muang in South Korea, a Boeing 737-800, and then during its landing, it crashed. Yesterday, I told you I announced 28 deaths with a report. That was an initial report that, of course, was likely to increase, and it has significantly increased. We've gone from 28 to 179. Almost everyone died, except for 2 people, apparently, from the cabin crew, the commercial flight personnel. That means flight attendants who were all seated at the back, who were probably thrown out or survived by a miracle. A very serious accident, the worst in the country's history, which already struggles with aviation issues. Since yesterday, it's been said that they don't have enough mechanics. That means when they bring in a new plane, God knows they're always bringing in new ones. With the explosion of air traffic, the problem is that you need mechanics, and it's not just one mechanic per plane. For example, if we take the company Korean Airlines, their national company Korean Airlines, they have 17 mechanics per plane. If you divide the number of mechanics by the number of planes roughly, that gives you this ratio. That means that if, for example, a company is going to introduce 10 planes this year, they need to find 170 mechanics. Roughly, in a market where there aren't any already, it doesn't seem to inspire vocations. But also, after the health crisis, about 1 out of 10 mechanics didn't come back to work. You know, aviation, the problem with it is that sometimes there isn't a projection, a long-term vision, it seems. Do you see the airlines waking up one day? Oh, it's the crisis. Fire everyone, pilots, mechanics, all out. 18 months later, they're desperate to hire, and sometimes they'll hire just anyone. 18 months ago, they fired everyone, so now they have to make up for it. So it's always excessive. There's a kind of pendulum that swings from one extreme to the other. In Korea, the result is that eventually long-haul flights this year are at 31.7%, or about a third, based on August statistics. Long-haul flights were often significantly delayed, sometimes by 8, 10, or even 24 hours. An entire day, mostly due to maintenance issues. So there's this background, there's already this atmosphere. Now, let's get back to our story about the plane. The plane, it seems, landed facing south, pointing south. Unlike what I said yesterday, it landed facing south. And then you see it coming out at the end of the runway. So what does it hit? It hits a mound at the end of the runway. It's not really a wall, because you can't really see it in the video. You really have to watch it frame by frame and everything. Actually, if you want, you have the runway, and in its extension, you have a mound. To raise the instrument landing system antenna, that means the instrument landing system, it has 2 antennas. It has the localizer antenna that defines the runway axis. And this one, of course, is made up of several antennas that are placed at the end of the runway. There's the glide that defines the descent path. That one is a single antenna that's usually placed on the side. It's a bit less dangerous, but the antenna that's still in front is the one for the instrument landing system. Normally, according to International Civil Aviation Organization regulations, I think everything related to airports, airport infrastructure, I believe that's Annex 14. I'm telling you this from memory. It's been a long time since I last looked at it, but it defines exactly how to build an airport, how to mark out a runway, protect its surroundings, and so on. And among those rules, you're not allowed to place structures, for example, concrete ones, at the end of the runway. In this case, it wasn't really a concrete structure. Anyway, it's going to be very interesting. If you want to see it, look it up, search on this channel with GTA. I think it was GTA, an African company. A plane taking off. I think it was a 727 taking off facing the sea. Very, very heavy, actually overweight. And then at the end of the runway, there was a concrete cabin that should have been removed years ago, but hadn't been removed. Then the 727 handled it. It shaved the roof off that shack. There was actually a guy inside. And in fact, it crashed a little further on, a few hundred meters further into the sea. So are you saying that objects, normally hard objects like that, shouldn't exist? At the end of the runway, all the runway lights and everything are usually on supports. How do you say, I almost said brittle, but it's not brittle, they're collapsible supports. Even if it's not the right word, someone will correct me in the comments. It's a support that breaks easily when you hit it. The problem here is that they needed to raise to elevate the LOX antenna. So they needed to raise it. What did they do? They placed it on a mound of earth. So they probably used a bulldozer, and then they brought in some soil. They placed it in the shape of a mound, and on top of it, they put the antennas. Now the question, I think it's Annex 14. The victim's lawyers are going to make more trouble with Talmudic meticulousness to determine whether a mound of earth counts as a solid structure or not. That's the question. The plane hit a mound of earth. Okay, let's continue. Our plane, when the video starts, he's sliding at high speed toward the end of the runway. By the way, I edited it yesterday. You see him after 7 seconds. He leaves the runway and hits the mound 2 seconds later. The speed is extremely high. You can feel it, even though we don't have the exact number yet, but the speed is high. You can see that most likely the plane lands on the last third or even the last quarter of the runway. This runway is 2,800 meters long, which is good, but not the longest. Some runways are 3,000, 3,200, 3,500, or even 4,000 meters, but this is still a runway. It's acceptable for emergency landings, but landing at full speed near the runway's end could mean 10 kilometers to stop. In aviation, never rely on the runway behind you or the altitude above you. That means that for a landing, whether it's an emergency or not, you need to have the runway in front of you. It doesn't matter if the length of the runway is behind you. So as I was saying, we see the plane on the ground. What else do we see? The plane is a little bit nose up. We're a little bit nose up. Did it adopt this attitude by itself, or did they pull back on the stick? It's very hard to say because, we don't see every day. Boeing 737-800S landing with their landing gear, so that we can compare their attitude and tell you, oh, yes, no, that's a normal nose up or something else. So there you go. The facts are there. You see, we have a plane that's sliding on the runway. That's true. Now, we know that one engine had trouble. We have a video. Which engine had trouble? It's engine 2, the right engine. You can see it on a video. You see a plane passing by and you can see there's a big kind of explosion behind it. So probably inside the plane. From the outside, it's not very impressive. It just explodes inside the plane, especially in the cockpit. What does that mean? It can mean vibrations. It can mean alarms showing up everywhere. Audible alarms, sound alarms, alarms that appear. Right, flashing lights or others, instruments going haywire. It can, if you add vibrations to that, it can, in the moment, create a lot of panic, create a sense of urgency, sometimes even a sense of urgency that might be more dramatic visually or sensorially than the reality. That means we could potentially count to 30 and calmly take action. It wouldn't have changed anything, except that's not what the environment suggests. The environment suggests that you have to act right away. Keep that in mind. Engine number 2 in right. When you look at the plane that's sliding down the runway, a question that came up was why the spoilers, so the lift destroyers. If you want the air brakes, if you prefer, as glider pilots say, why didn't they come out? The air brakes only deploy when the landing gear is down. Why? Because generally, when landing with a 737, they are set to the armed position. So when they're set to armed during the approach, nothing happens immediately. But there's a switch on the landing gear that allows the aircraft system to know if the plane is in flight or if it's on the ground. It's also found on Airbus, and it feeds a lot of systems that have to operate one way when they're on the ground and another way when they're in flight. So one thing is that when the plane touches the ground during a normal landing, the landing gear is compressed. So the switch says, oh, we're on the ground. It informs the system, and then the air brakes or spoilers deploy. Some deploy during flight and are visible, while others are located more internally, which are almost as big as garage doors on some planes and are towards the inside, which are never deployed in flight and also come out. This destroys the wing's residual lift, prevents bouncing, presses the plane to the ground, and improves brake performance. Otherwise, there is still some lift, and then the brakes, which have ABS, originally invented for aviation before cars. It's about any remaining lift. You have a plane, for example, that weighs 60 tons, but you don't have 60 tons on the wheels. You have much less, maybe 20 tons on the wheels. So the wheels don't have good grip, And so when braking, we start to have a bit of a tendency to lock up. So it reduces the effectiveness of the braking. That's why the air brakes weren't deployed, because they probably weren't armed. And most certainly, it's because the landing gear was retracted. So no landing gear. No spoilers, unless they deployed them manually, but that doesn't seem to have been the case. Now let's continue. When you see this plane sliding down the runway, you notice the two engines. The one you really notice is the right engine, number 2, the one that took a beating in the previous video, the one where you can see it spewing stuff out. If you notice, this engine is a bit open, which means it's in reverse mode, thrust reversal. This mode doesn't activate by itself. It must have been engaged from the cockpit pulled. And here it opens up. And actually, there are buckets that open. What's the purpose of these buckets? It's that they open and redirect the thrust forward. The engine is normally supposed to accelerate at that moment, increase in power, and then it will redirect the air forward, creating a kind of aerodynamic braking. Okay, now, if you notice, and you can see it, my friends, I'll take a screenshot for you. You can see it for just a split second, only for a split second. If you notice the engine on the other side against the lateral, isn't that the one? You notice that it's not in reverse mode. You notice that for it, the reverse is locked. So what happened? What can we say about this? What happened? What could have happened? It's two things. Going back to the landing gear, why didn't the landing gear come out? Landing gear must be deployed. Why isn't it? Hydraulic failure has been mentioned and all that. Yes, not a hydraulic issue. I agree. How does the landing gear work on a 737? On a 737, it works like this. The pilots throttle up to take off, accelerate, and pull back on the yoke to lift off. 5-1, rotate, the plane starts to climb, and then they have a positive rate of climb, so it starts to go up, and then click, the landing gear is retracted in the older models, like for example, the classic models. They would do it, and then after, they would wait a moment and put the lever in neutral. This would deactivate the hydraulic circuit on the landing gear system, meaning the landing gear is not constantly held in place. Flying with a hydraulic circuit doesn't make sense. So what should we do? We deactivate the hydraulic circuit on a new generation of Boeing. There's no need for that, just like that. And the system automatically later deactivates the hydraulic circuit. But the landing gear is held in place by a hook system. If you want, what do? If we can't remove it, like if hydraulics fail, it's fine. The weight will make it fall out on its own. If you look at the 737 from underneath, there's no door. There's no door on the landing gear. The wheels are just retracted. When a 737 flies with the gear up, you can still see the rear main landing gear wheels, but not the front. So no matter the situation, including a 2-engine failure, the pilot can still extend the landing gear. That means he activated the emergency system, and then what happens? Simply by a cable system, through a cable mechanism, it will release those locks that hold the landing gear. It will fall by its own weight. It will fall on its own. It will lock itself. This wasn't attempted, since we would have seen the landing gear at least partially or fully extended. But we don't see that here. Even if the landing gear was extended, the accident likely would have occurred the same way. Because if they landed at high speed at the end of the runway, honestly, with or without the landing gear, they would have had the brakes. That's true. They would have braked. The wheels might have burst, but at the speed they were going, they would have gone off the runway anyway. So the only reason the landing gear wasn't extended is because the pilots didn't deploy it. Could they have deployed it? No, I'd say almost certainly, but they didn't. So we're clearly in a situation where there's a kind of haste, a kind of panic, a kind of loss of control. So there's a degree of human factor that still needs to be considered for the rest. Now, why are they forced to? And unfortunately, the flight radar data is incomplete. So because of all that, we have to work a bit with videos and testimonies and all that. And actually, what happens is that our pilots decide to land. They're in the process of landing. So they literally decide to crash onto the runway. Were the flaps deployed? So I watched the videos. It's really hard to tell if the flaps were deployed or not. These are videos of the wings. You can't really see if they were partially deployed, fully deployed, or not at all. Given the speed of the plane, it's likely that the flaps were not used. Because if the flaps had been used, the speed would have been lower. However, the speed is very high, so it's likely that the flaps were not used. There's a marker that I'm giving you, so I'm giving it to you. I'm going to open 50 quotation marks. I'm giving it to you, and we close 50 quotation marks after. I'm giving it to you. It's more presumptive than anything else. It's open to debate, I would even say. It's extremely divisive, but I'll show you. When you have a Boeing 737 that's coming into land, it's the same mechanism everywhere. And when the flaps come out, the more the flaps come out, the slower the plane moves. The more the pilots they need to change the position of the adjustable horizontal stabilizer, which is all the way at the back, to make it more and more pitched up. The slower they go, the more the stabilizer has to be pitched up. So normally when they land, it's relatively pitched up. I'll show you that in the simulator one day, but it's relatively pitched up. The adjustable horizontal stabilizer is positioned, it's bare, or it moves, or it's activated. If you prefer by a worm screw, this worm screw, in general, even when a plane crashes head on into a mountain, we find it and it's not twisted or anything, but the tabs on it don't move. That means the position of the worm screw, generally just before or just after the impact, it's exactly the same. In this case, we don't need to look at the worm screw, since we have the tail section, which was somewhat affected by flames, but still intact. If we look at the position of the adjustable horizontal stabilizer and compare it with other planes, it seems to be in the neutral position, slightly nose down. It seems to match a plane that's going fast. It doesn't look like it's in a position for a plane that's going slow. I'll show you some other images I found. For example, I found an image of the Southwest picture. It's a 737-700. I can't recognize it with the naked eye, so I checked the registration and looked it up. It's a 737-700. And actually, when you look at the landing and you see that on the rail, on this spot, this marker, there's a kind of index like this made of metal. You can see that what's left above is much greater than what's left below. Whereas here, when you look at it, when you look at the Korean one, there's a lot of play. Okay, there's a lot of play above, which shows that probably we weren't. More play underneath. I'm already starting to get confused. It's that he wasn't in a situation, right? He wasn't in a situation of stalling out and slow nose up planes and all that. Let's try to piece everything together. I'll share a theory, but remember, it's just a theory. Don't hold it against me. Later on, if it turns out that's not it, you know, people always put on the pressure. Tell us, what do you think? What do you think? I speak my mind, but it's always risky when you do the same. I give you possible theories, but that doesn't mean it's the definitive theory. I keep the doors open. Okay, imagine the following situation. You have another plane that's flying. Yes, it hits some birds, all that on one engine, or the engines just explode on their own. You don't even need birds, they just explode on their own. Maintenance problem, whatever, we can't know, it exploded. Engine 2, okay. Panic in the cockpit, we shut down engine number 1. That means we shut down the left engine, now we have no engines at all. In the history of aviation, it's much more likely in terms of probability. Only if I take a probabilistic approach in the balance of probabilities, it's much more imaginable that a plane loses an engine and the pilot shut down the wrong one. By the way, you notice on this channel, there's one, it's Taipei. It was in Taiwan, an Airways da Trasporto Regionale, where they shut down the wrong engine, not the engine, they shut down the wrong one. It's more likely the pilots make a mistake and shut down the wrong one. Engine, than both engines failing. You see, if a plane, I know for a fact that it has one engine out, but I think that both engines, in the end, at the moment of impact with the runway, both engines had failed. I'm more inclined to believe that the pilot shut down the wrong engine, meaning the one that was working, than to believe that both engines failed. You see, it's just a probabilistic approach. It is what it is. But there you go. So the pilot shut down the wrong engine. Now they're in a lot of trouble because now at low altitude, and then no more engine at all. So there you have it. They're left to literally fall. So they're aiming for the runway. There's no way to throttle up because there's the runway. The runway is right there in front of them. There's no way to throttle up. There's no power coming. So they touch down at high speed on the runway. Okay, in their panic because they're falling. You can imagine the ground proximity warning system yelling and all that, the alarms, everything. They don't lower the landing gear. And then also what happens when they reflexively touch a thrust reverser as they land. So the reversers deploy on the damaged engine, which is spinning and acting up. But it's still running. Sometimes even a badly damaged engine can keep working if the core is intact. The N2, which is spinning without any problem, which is running and all that. So this engine, we have its reverse thrust working. The other engine, nothing responds. It's like a brick. Nothing comes out of there because this engine is dead, because they shut it down themselves. They arrive sliding with one engine off, the other damaged but running, and reverse thrust deployed. You see what I mean? Now we're starting to get a little closer to something that looks like what we know. And then, you know what happens next? The rest is history. The rest, they go out, hit the mound of earth. The ground is pulverized. The plane explodes immediately. 179 dead. Tragedy. The greatest air tragedy in Korea. Korea was a country, safety-wise. They crashed a 747. They crashed quite a few planes. At one point, it was a very dangerous country in terms of aviation. Afterwards, they collaborated with the Germans from Lufthansa. At some point, they managed to restore safety. Except that if they let go, they could go back to how it was before. And before, it wasn't great, unfortunately. Where? There you go, my friends. So what we have at this stage, of course, is just information. It's not an analysis I'm doing 10 years after the event. Clearly, we're using the elements we can gather here and there, but that's about what we have. There's a strong human factor. I think that practically it's like all the accidents on this canal. In reality, you have a normal situation. It always starts like that. If a plane is working normally, you have a typical situation. An alarm, an engine, a vibration, a scream, anything. You have something that comes and interrupts the routine afterwards. You have the possibility of human errors on top of that. So agitation, panic, mistakes. The British did it. It was in the 80s or 70s. They shut down the wrong engine on a plane. So no one boasts, since it can happen to anyone. It happened. The British did it once. They crashed a plane because they shut down the wrong engine. So they even made a thing about it once. The British, that was back in the 70s. And they retracted the flaps too early on a plane. They stole a commercial airliner. The airliner was climbing very slowly. It was the mechanic, I'm telling you. Finding things from the 70s is tough. Clack. They fully retracted the flaps and leading edge slats. Now, the slats are what allow the plane to fly at a high angle of attack. They're more important than the flaps, if you want, during takeoff. What happened? The plane literally fell flat, killing everyone. You see stuff like that. It didn't happen to everyone, but that's just how it is. There you go, my friends. And then we'll talk about it in a few months when there are more details. Thank you for listening to this video up to this point, and I'll see you in the next one. So yes, by the way, I want to tell you, I'm giving you 2 pieces of information. I'm giving you the phone. I have a phone. You can leave me messages on WhatsApp. That's where people send me news on WhatsApp, news information, all that. Okay, don't hesitate to send things on WhatsApp. Here, it's always received with pleasure. I try to reply to as many people as possible, but if I don't reply, I ask or I beg. Your understanding about that, it's not out of contempt or neglect or anything. It's just that I've had a lot of messages. Otherwise, I wanted to tell you I opened a channel, Aldo Voyages, and this isn't about tragedy at all. You know, I ended up in the accident. I found myself in the plane crash just like that. It's a long story to tell, but you see, at first, it wasn't a life project to begin with. But well, I'm very happy to be able to contribute things to aviation and all that. And I'm followed by a lot of pilots. I really thank them. A lot of them helped me in everything, even in this video. Okay, a lot helped me with their analysis, documentation, experience, all that. It's great. And then there are instructors who recommend this channel. People tell me they come to watch my channel because their instructor told them to do it. I would have preferred if the instructor had time to share things related to aviation safety. But when those instructors talk to me, they say their resources, budgets, and means have been cut. So you see, that's what this channel is for as well. It's to help spread information about aviation safety a little bit. That's the goal, really, the main purpose of this channel. Otherwise, as I told you, I started a channel about travel. I'm just sharing a travel blog, a travel journal, if you're interested. Cruise, something like that. Thank you all for following along so far. And then I'll see you this month in the next video. I was making a video about something I can't recall. Also, I wanted to show you my book, Escrology. Okay, political ecology. I'm very active. Those who know me on other channels, I'm really involved. And especially against political ecology that will bring us back to the Middle Ages. I mean, with political ecology, we don't need to have a channel about air safety. There won't be any planes anyway, so that's it. Well, there will be private jets. We can always talk about those. A big topic. There's a bit of everything. Anyway, thank you, my friends, for listening to this video up to this point, and I'll see you in the next one soon.